This video will walk you through typical calculations for variance analysis. A company purchases 15,000 pounds of materials. The materials price variance is 6,000 favorable. What is the difference between the standard and actual price paid for the materials? So, first thing we want to do is write the material price variance formula. Going to our trusty formula sheet, material price variance, actual quantity purchased times the difference of price. So it says the company purchases 15,000 pounds of material. So that's my actual quantity purchased. Tells us that the variance itself is 6,000 favorable. And we want to know what is the difference between standard and actual price. Doesn't want to know what each of them are, just wants to know what is this difference here. So what we want to do is represent that difference with a variable. Namely, let's represent it with an x. So if we take 6,000 divided by 15,000 equals x, x is going to equal 40 cents, or B. So it's saying the difference between actual price and standard price, whatever they are, is 40 cents. And the other thing is, just to step back a second, if that 40 cents and it's a favorable variance, which one has to be greater? Well, if it's favorable, it says my actual price must be less than my standard price, which means this difference technically is a negative number. But all they wanted to know what the difference was, so they're talking about the absolute value, so it's 40 cents. But again, favorable means that the difference has to be negative. Okay, 20. A company uses 40,000 gallons of materials, for which it paid $9 a gallon. The material price variance was 80,000 favorable. What is the standard price per gallon? So again, we're using the exact same variance. Material price variance equals my actual quantity purchased times my actual price minus my standard price. So the company used 40,000 gallons. Which we paid $9 a gallon. So $9 per gallon. We don't know our standard price, that's what we're trying to get. And we know that we had a favorable 80,000 variance. Now again, if it's favorable, what is that saying about my standard price? Well, my standard price has to be greater than my actual price. So whatever we get has to be bigger than $9. So that says 80,000 equals 40,000 times 9 minus 40,000 times SP. So 80,000 equals 360,000 minus 40,000 SP. Now here's where you got to be careful. If this is favorable, remember I've been saying, if it's favorable, you're going to get a negative variance. So to get rid of this 360, I'm going to subtract 360 from this side and add a negative 360. I'm sorry, my tablet's going a little nuts over here. So a negative 80 plus a negative 360 gives me a negative 440,000 equals 40,000 SP. Now I can solve SP by dividing 440,000 divided by 40,000 Therefore, my SP is going to be equal to $11. So I wanted just to show you again what I'm trying to say about this favorable. So we're going to do it by plugging in and now solving for the variance. So again, material price variance equals actual quantity times my actual price minus my standard price. We know the actual quantity was 40,000 gallons. Standard price was 9. I'm sorry, actual price was 9. Standard price was 11. So we get 40,000. 9 minus 11 gives me a negative 2. Negative 2 times 40,000 gives me a negative 80,000 variance, which means when it's negative, notice I said when it's negative, move this up just a little bit. If I can get this just to move up a little bit. Here we go. When it's negative, I told you we had a negative variance there, just like we solved it here. So again, I think when you look at this problem from both ways, it's going to really help bring home that when you have a positive variance, when you're talking about cost, it's unfavorable because it means your actual information was greater than your standard information. When you have a negative variance, it means your actual information was less than your standard information, which is what gave you the negative, just like you did here. Now we're going to go to a comprehensive variance analysis problem. Thomson Company uses a standard cost system for its single product. The following data is available. Actual experience for the current year. So we purchased raw materials, namely, we purchased 15,000 yards at $13 per yard for a total cost of $195,000. We used, however, only 12,000 yards. So this is where our actual quantity purchased is not equal to our actual quantity used. And remember, actual quantity purchased is for the material price variance. Actual quantity used is for the material quantity variance. Direct labor cost 10,200 hours at $10 per hour. Total cost $102,000. Actual variable overhead cost $84,150, and we produced actual units of 12,600 units. Then our standards per unit of product, raw materials, says we should use a standard of 1.1 yards per unit at a cost of $15 per yard. Direct labor says we should use 0.8 hours per unit at $9.50 per hour. And variable overhead says we should use $8 per direct labor hour. So the problem wants us to compute and find the 6 variances. So the first one is our material price variance, which is equal to my actual quantity purchased times the difference of my actual price minus my standard price. So my actual quantity purchased was 15,000 yards at a price of $13 per yard versus a standard price of $15 per yard. So I can see that my standard price is greater than my actual price. So we know we're going to have a favorable variance here. So when we multiply it out, we're going to get 15,000 yards times negative $2 per yard. And we're going to get negative $30,000. And that's going to be favorable. B, material quantity variance equals my standard price times the difference of my actual quantity used versus my standard quantity that we should have used. We know the standard price because it's here, $15 per yard. We know the actual quantity used. We want to go back up here so you can see the difference. Actual quantity used, 12,000 yards. And standard quantity says I should take how many units are produced times what I say I should use per unit. 1.1 yards per unit times 12,600 units. So my actual quantity is 12,000 yards minus my standard quantity, and I'm going to do that down here to show you how we calculate standard quantity again, equals my actual units produced times the quantity per unit. And the quantity per unit is, sorry, it should be yards. How many yards per unit should we use? And that's 1.1 yards. So the actual units produced is 12,600 units. Times 1.1 yards per unit. That says my standard quantity should be 13,860 yards. So I get $15 per yard times the difference, again a negative difference here, of 1,860. Yards cancel out, and I'm left with a negative 27,900 favorable variance. C is my labor rate variance. Labor rate variance is my actual hours times the difference of my actual rate minus my standard rate. The actual hours was 10,200 hours. Our actual rate is $10, and our standard rate should be $9.50 per hour. So 10,200 hours times the difference of 10 minus 950. Since our actual rate is higher than our standard rate, we're going to get a positive variance. Positive variance when we talk about cost is unfavorable. So we get 10,200 hours times 50 cents difference per hour. So that's going to give us a positive 5,100 unfavorable. Our labor efficiency variance equals my standard rate times my actual hours versus the difference of my standard hours. We know the standard rate is $9.50 per hour. We know the actual hours is 10,200 hours. We've got to calculate again our standard quantity or our standard hours. That's going to be equal to my actual output of 12,600 units times how many hours should I use per unit. And again, going back to the original information, it says we should use 0.08 hours per unit. And again, to show you where I get that, 0.08 hours for labor per unit. And that says we should have standard hours of 10,080 hours. So then it's $9.50 per hour times the difference of 120 hours gives me a variance of 1,140 unfavorable. And again, that's because my actual hours exceeded my standard quantity hours. Okay. E is our variable overhead rate variance. That is actual hours times actual rate minus actual hours times standard rate. Now, a lot of times we use the condensed version, which says actual hours times the difference of the rates. But because of how they gave us the information, they told us our actual cost is $84,150. That's what you get when you multiply actual hours times actual rate. They didn't give us that broken out, so we just have to use the total here. So 84,150 minus actual hours we know is 10,200 hours. My standard rate, they told us, is $8 per hour. And I'm getting that right there, $8 per direct labor hour. So doing that, we get 84,150 minus, when we multiply this out, we get 81,600. We get a positive 25,550, which is unfavorable. The last variance is the variable overhead efficiency variance. That is the standard rate times actual hours minus standard hours. The standard rate, we already know because we just used it, is $8 per hour. My actual hours we know is 10,200 hours. Standard hours we calculated for our direct labor variance. Standard hours is the 10,080 hours. 10,080 hours gives us $8 per hour times the difference here, and that gives us 120 hours. And I apologize, the answer key is wrong on this. The answer key says 20 hours, so I dropped a 1. It should be 120 hours. So 8 times 120 is a positive 960, therefore unfavorable. So I hope this helps you to better understand how to use the given information to calculate the 6 variances.